I want to tell you something that took me 63 years and one wedding day to finally understand. The moment I understood it, I was sitting 5 tables back from the head table at my own stepdaughter's reception, watching a man I'd never met raise a champagne glass and call himself her father. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it started. It was a Sunday in early March 2006. I was standing in the parking lot of Calvary Baptist Church in Decatur, Georgia, trying to get the ice off my windshield with a gas station receipt because I'd left my scraper in my other car. A woman walked past me carrying a toddler on one hip and a diaper bag on the other shoulder, and the diaper bag slipped, and everything inside it hit the pavement at once. I picked it up. I handed it back. She laughed and said thank you, and her name was Renee. Renee Coleman had a 3-year-old daughter named Becca. The girl's biological father, a man I'll call by the one thing he ever gave her, his absence, was out of the picture. Renee told me on our second date, just laid it out plain across the table at the Waffle House on Memorial Drive. "I come with a package deal," she said. "You need to know that before this goes anywhere." I told her I wasn't scared of package deals. I meant it. I was 51 years old, never married, no kids of my own. I'd spent 3 decades building custom cabinets for a living and coming home to a quiet apartment in Decatur that always smelled faintly of sawdust no matter how many times I mopped the floor. A little girl in braids who hid behind her mother's leg when I came to pick Renee up. That didn't scare me. That felt like something worth showing up for. We got married 14 months later. Small ceremony. Renee's mother, my brother Clifton, a few friends from church. Becca was 4 years old and wore a white dress with a purple sash and spent most of the reception running in circles on the grass outside the reception hall. When I knelt down to tie her shoe, she patted the top of my head like I was a dog she'd decided to keep. I laughed harder than I had in years. I never adopted Becca legally. Renee said she'd tried to get the father to relinquish his parental rights, and he'd disappeared so completely that the paperwork had nowhere to go. I said it didn't matter. What mattered was what I did, not what any document said. My own father taught me that. He raised 3 boys on a mechanic's salary in Macon, and never once let us forget that showing up was the whole job. So I showed up. Becca started calling me Daddy Lloyd somewhere around age 6. I didn't ask her to. It just happened one Saturday morning while I was making pancakes, and she wandered into the kitchen in her pajamas and said, "Daddy Lloyd, can I have chocolate chips in mine?" I said yes. I always said yes to chocolate chips. Some things are not worth a conversation. I paid for her braces at 13. I drove her to soccer practice twice a week at the rec center on Flat Shoals Road and sat in the fold-out chairs with the other parents in the Georgia heat and didn't complain about a minute of it. I helped her apply to college. She wanted to study interior design at the Savannah College of Art and Design. I sat at the dining room table with her for 3 nights straight, going over her portfolio, telling her to stop apologizing for her work and let it speak. She got in. The tuition was real, it was mine, and I paid it without keeping count. That's not something I want credit for. That's just what fathers do. Renee and I had a good marriage for most of those years. Not a perfect one. She was a social worker and she carried her work home in her shoulders, that particular kind of tired that sits just below the surface and takes years to build up. Some weekends she'd go quiet in a way that had nothing to do with me. I learned to give her the space and keep the coffee hot. We weren't the couple who finished each other's sentences. We were the couple who sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the neighborhood go dark and didn't need to fill every silence. That felt like enough. More than enough some years. Becca's biological father resurfaced when she was 19. Renee mentioned it once, casually, the way you mentioned the weather. He'd reached out through her sister. He was living in Nashville now. He wanted to reconnect. I asked Renee how Becca felt about it. She said Becca was curious. I said that was natural. I didn't say anything else. I didn't feel threatened. I told myself a man who vanishes for 15 years doesn't come back as a father. He comes back as a question mark. I believed that. I believed it for a long time. The wedding was Becca's idea from the start. She and her fiancé, a quiet, lanky accountant from Chattanooga named Preston who wore the same gray sneakers to every occasion and had the kind of stillness about him that I trusted immediately. had gotten engaged on New Year's Eve, and by February they were deep into planning a June ceremony. The venue was a restored farmhouse outside of Athens, Georgia. 200 guests, string lights in the oak trees, a caterer from Atlanta who specialized in what the website called Elevated Southern. I went with Becca to look at the venue in March, just the two of us. Renee had a home visit she couldn't reschedule. We drove out together in my truck, Becca with her notebook and measuring tape, because she was her own wedding planner whether anyone had hired her or not. She walked through the barn with that focused look she got, the same one from the portfolio nights at the dining room table, and I stood back and let her think. She turned around at one point and said, "Dad, what do you think?" Just like that, Dad. No Lloyd after it. The first time in years she dropped the Lloyd. I told her it was beautiful. On the drive home, she talked about the music, the flowers, the seating chart. She asked me to walk her down the aisle. I said I would be honored. That's the word I used. Honored. Because it was the right word. Because I meant it exactly. When I got home, I told Renee. She hugged me. She said she knew Becca would ask. She said she was happy. She seemed happy. I believed her because that's what you do when you've been married 17 years to someone. You believe the things they show you. I found out about the other plan on a Wednesday night in May. I wasn't supposed to find out. I was supposed to be at my brother Clifton's house watching the Hawks game. But Clifton called and canceled, and I came home early and walked into the kitchen, and Renee was on the phone. She didn't hear me come in. The garage door was loud, but she had her back to it, and the TV in the other room was going. I heard her say his name, the father's name, and then I heard her say, "I know it's what she wants, but we have to be careful about how Lloyd finds out. He's going to have feelings about this." Another pause. "Just tell her to have the conversation before the rehearsal dinner, not after. He deserves that much." I stood in the doorway with my jacket still on. Renee turned around, the color in her face changed. I asked her what conversation Becca was supposed to have with me. She didn't answer right away. She set the phone face down on the counter. She said, "Let's sit down." I said I'd rather stand. It came out in pieces. Becca had been in contact with her biological father for 3 years. More than curiosity, real contact. Phone calls, visits to Nashville, one trip to the beach with his wife and their kids. Nobody told me. Not Becca, not Renee. 3 years. He had apparently expressed that he wanted to be part of the wedding, that he wanted to walk Becca down the aisle with Renee. The plan, as Renee explained it to me standing in our kitchen with her hands folded in front of her, the way she stood when she was bracing for something, was that all 3 of them would do it together. Renee on one side, him on the other, Becca in the middle. It was Becca's idea, Renee said. She said it the way people say things they need you to believe. I said that was fine. I said it quietly, and I meant it quietly. Not cold, not broken, just finished with the conversation. I hung my jacket in the closet. I went to bed. I lay there looking at the ceiling fan the way you look at something you're not actually seeing, and I thought about a lot of things. The pancakes with chocolate chips, the fold-out chairs in the Georgia heat, the 3 nights at the dining room table, the word "Dad" said from across a restored barn in March, without the Lloyd after it. 3 years. I got up at 5. I made coffee and I sat at the kitchen table and I thought about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. Here's the thing about being 63 years old and realizing you've been managed. Managed carefully. Managed carefully. Managed kindly. Managed by people who probably told themselves they were protecting you, but managed nonetheless. You don't have to yell about it. You don't have to turn it into a scene. You just have to decide what you're done with and what you're not. I went to the wedding. Of course I went to the wedding. I bought a new suit, charcoal gray, from a department store in Buckhead. I got my shoes shined at the place on Peachtree that's been there since before I was born. I drove to Athens on a clear June Saturday with a card in my breast pocket that had a check in it, a number I won't say out loud, that represented 17 years of standing in bleachers and sitting at kitchen tables and signing financial aid forms and buying braces. I arrived early. The farmhouse was beautiful, I'll give it that. The string lights were already on in the oaks even though it was afternoon. The caterer had set up long tables with white linen and small glass vases with sunflowers, Becca's favorite, which I knew because I was the one who drove her to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings when she was 11, and she always stopped at the same stall. I found my name on the seating chart near the entrance. Table 9. I stood there for a moment. I counted the tables between mine and the head table. 5. I took a breath. I found my seat. I set the card with a check in my jacket pocket, and I sat down and I introduced myself to the couple beside me, who were Preston's coworkers from Chattanooga. And I was pleasant because I'm a pleasant man. That is one of the things I've always been. I watched Becca come down the aisle from the back of the barn. She was on Renee's left arm, and on her right was a man I had never been introduced to in 17 years of being her father. He was about my height, well-dressed. He had an easy smile and the relaxed posture of a man who has not spent 17 years at a soccer complex in the summer heat. He walked Becca to Preston and shook Preston's hand, and then stepped back to his seat in the front row, Renee beside him, and they sat together like something rehearsed, like something that had been decided a long time ago by people in a room I was never invited into. I sat in the back and I watched my daughter get married from table 9, and I kept my face pleasant because it is the only face I know how to keep. At the reception, he gave a toast. He stood up at the microphone and the room went quiet, and he talked about Becca as a little girl, which was a creative act, since he had not been present for most of her little girlhood. He talked about how proud he was. He said she was the best thing he'd ever done. The room made the sounds rooms make during toasts, laughter at the right moments, hands on hearts. Someone at the table behind me said, "That's so sweet." Renee toasted after him. She talked about watching Becca become the woman she always knew she would be. She thanked Preston's family. She thanked the venue. She did not mention me by name. I waited to see if anyone else would speak. No one did. I drank my water. I ate the food, which was genuinely good. I watched Becca dance with Preston, and I watched Renee laugh with her table, and I sat at table 9, and I thought about my father in Macon, who died in a recliner watching a Braves game in 2009, and who once told me the only thing a man can control is what he puts his name on. I left before the cake was cut, and I told no one. I walked to my truck in the gravel lot and sat for a moment listening to the sounds coming from the barn, music and voices and the particular noise of people celebrating something. I drove home on the interstate with the windows down even though the June night was warm. The house was dark when I got there. It had a different quality of dark than usual. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then I sat down in my chair, the one I always sat in, the one closest to the side window, and I opened my jacket and took out the card with the check. I looked at it. Then I put it back in the envelope and I put the envelope in the kitchen drawer. I had 3 meetings the following week. The first was with my accountant. Every joint account Renee and I shared, every automatic payment that ran through our combined finances, we went through it line by line. I wasn't reckless about it. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply organizing what was mine and what wasn't. The second was with a real estate attorney. The house on Glenwood Avenue had been mine before the marriage. I'd paid down the mortgage on my own for 6 years before Renee and I got together. Same as the man in the other story, though I didn't know that story then. I was just living mine. Her name was not on the deed. I'd never suggested it should be. She'd never asked. My father's voice again, quiet and from a long way off. "Keep your name on what you built, son." The third meeting was with a marriage counselor, not to fix things, to be honest about what was in front of me and to make sure I was thinking clearly before I did anything I couldn't undo. The counselor was a woman in her 50s named Dr. Patars. Hold, calm voice, reading glasses on a chain. The kind of professional who has clearly seen every version of the conversation you thought was unique to you. I told her what had happened. She asked me how long I'd been sitting with it. I said since May. She nodded. She asked what I wanted. I said I wanted to stop being managed. She said that was a good place to start. Renee came home from the wedding still smiling. She talked about the dress, the dancing, how emotional she'd gotten during the vows. She asked if I'd had a good time. I said the food was excellent. She kissed my cheek and went to get ready for bed. She did not ask why I had left early. Either she hadn't noticed or she had and didn't want to open the door. I told her on a Sunday morning 2 weeks later. Coffee on the table, sun coming through the side window, the particular quiet of a Georgia summer before the heat reaches its full intensity. I told her I knew about the 3 years. I told her I knew it hadn't been my idea to find out about it at the rehearsal. I told her that table 9 was something I was going to be a long time understanding. She cried. She said she'd thought she was protecting me. She said Becca hadn't wanted me to feel replaced. I asked her if she'd considered that being moved to the back of the room was a faster way to feel replaced than any conversation could have been. She didn't have an answer for that. There aren't always answers. We separated in September. The house stayed in my name. I moved Renee's things to the smaller bedroom while we worked with the lawyers, and when the papers were drawn up, I was fair about it. Fair, in the way my father taught me to be fair, which means you don't take more than what's yours, but you also don't give away what you built. Becca called me in October. She was back from the honeymoon, settled into the apartment in Chattanooga. She said she'd heard from her mother that things were difficult. I said that was a polite word for it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I should have told you myself." About him, about the plan for the aisle. You deserved to hear it from me, and not accidentally. I told her she was right. She said I wasn't trying to erase you. I said I know. That's almost what made it harder. She said she was sorry. I said I believed her. We didn't talk for another month after that. Then she called again, just to call. To say she'd gone back to Savannah for a weekend with Preston, and they'd walked around the design district, and it reminded her of the portfolio nights at the dining room table. I said I remembered those nights too. I said I was proud of what she'd built. She said, "I know, Dad." No Lloyd. Just Dad. I live alone now in the house on Glenwood Avenue. It's too much house for one person. I've thought about selling. The neighborhood has changed in the years I've been here, and I could get a good number for it. But for now I stay because I know where everything is, and at 63 that matters more than it used to. I still make cabinets. Custom work, same as always, mostly kitchens and built-ins for the kind of houses going up in the suburbs east of Atlanta. I have a man who works with me, young guy from Conyers, named Trevor, 24 years old, asks good questions, learns fast. Some mornings he gets here before I do and starts the sanding without being asked. I think about the kind of man he'll be in 40 years, and I hope he's the kind who knows the difference between love and arrangement before it costs him too much. I sit on the porch most evenings now. The oak in the front yard has gotten enormous. I planted it from a sapling 20 years ago, and I remember when I could put my hand around the whole trunk. Now I can barely get my arms around it. There's something in that, though I'm still working out exactly what. Becca sends me pictures of the apartment. The way she's arranged things, the rug she found, the curtain she made herself. She has her mother's eye for space and her own sense of what belongs where. Last month she sent me a picture of the kitchen and I recognized the cabinet hardware. Same style I'd suggested in the portfolio nights. She didn't mention it, but she sent the picture. That means something. I've learned to take what's offered and not ask for more than what's given freely. Someone at church asked me recently if I was bitter. I thought about the question for a longer time than she probably expected. I said no. I said I was clear. There's a difference. Bitter means you're still in the argument. Clear means you've counted what you have and figured out what it's worth and decided to do something real with what's left. I've got more left than I sometimes let myself admit. I've got the house and the shop and the oak tree, and the young man who shows up early and a daughter in Chattanooga who sends pictures of her cabinets in a chair on the porch where I can see the whole street change color when the evening comes in. And I've got one thing that took me 17 years and a table at the back of a reception to understand. When someone shows you where they put you, believe them. Not because it means you're not worth more. You might be worth a great deal. But because it tells you something true about where you are. And truth is the only ground you can build anything solid on. I don't need to be in the front row to know what I built. The front row is for people who need to be seen. I know what I did. I know it the way a man knows his own hands. That's enough. That has always been enough. I've been sitting with this story long enough now to see it clearly, the way you can finally read a room once all the furniture has been moved out and the light comes through at a different angle. What happened to me didn't start at table 9. It started years before that, in the small moments I let pass without naming them. Every time I wrote a tuition check and didn't ask to be included in the conversation. Every time I drove to soccer practice and told myself that being present was enough, that good men don't need acknowledgement, that love is its own receipt. I was right about that last part. But I was wrong to confuse silence with patience. There is a version of silence that is patient and dignified. And there is a version that is just accommodation dressed up to look like virtue. I spent a long time not knowing which one I was practicing. The honest reckoning, and I mean honest the way it costs you something to be, is that the people in my life gave me exactly what I accepted, not because they were cruel people at their core. Renee is not a cruel woman. Becca is not a cruel daughter, but they learned slowly, over years, that I would absorb what was handed to me and keep the coffee hot and not make a scene. That is a lesson I taught them. And once you teach a lesson that well, you don't get to be surprised when the class applies it. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell stories like mine. The cause and the effect don't always look related. I was generous, that was real. I was steady, that was real. But somewhere in the middle of being those things, I stopped being legible. I became the furniture. Solid, useful, easy to rearrange. What I had to learn. And table 9 was the classroom. Is that real character isn't just about what you give. It's about knowing your own worth clearly enough that you don't hand it over to be managed. That takes something more than kindness. It takes a kind of intelligence about yourself, about what you've built and what you're owed. Not in the small petty sense, but in the plain human sense. The same way a craftsman knows his own work when he sees it. I spent 17 years building something, and I nearly let it be defined by people who came in at the end and said they were always there. And then there is the matter of staying, not staying in the marriage. That decision made itself. I mean staying standing, not collapsing into bitterness, not letting table 9 become the whole story. That requires something I can only call endurance that's chosen on purpose, the kind that doesn't ask for an audience, that just gets up at 5 and makes coffee and goes to the shop and teaches a young man from Conyers how to fit a cabinet door so it closes without a sound. I don't know what Becca will make of all of this as the years go on. She's called more since the wedding. That matters. I'm not in a hurry. The oak tree in the front yard took 20 years to become what it is. I'm not about to start measuring things by shorter seasons. What I know is this. The life I have now is mine, in a way it wasn't before. Not because I took anything from anyone. Because I finally stopped giving away what I built and calling it love.